Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something on the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're joining the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know would like to come on the show and have a chat with me, feel free to find me on your social media platform. And the best way to find if I'm on there, which I probably am, is if you go to isaacr11.com, you'll see all the places that I'm at. Anyway, with that out of the way, I'm looking forward to my conversation. We're chatting about all sorts of things, talking about hockey, we're talking about guitars, and I'm looking forward to actually having a conversation about technology. So my guest today is Michael Stahnke. Michael, do you want to say hello to yourself?
Yeah. Hello. How's everybody doing? I hope you're having a great day. Yeah, I'm Mike. I am the VP of Engineering at Flox, which is a Series B startup, and I've had a just different career in startups and in enterprise, I guess. And so we'll probably get into that a bit.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Like the enterprise versus startup thing is always a very fascinating conversation, and especially how you got to one in which, if you have preferences in one. I love getting started stories too. So can you recall when technology first kind of introduced itself to you, and do you have a good story around that?
Yeah, I was in middle school, certainly, and maybe even a little bit before that. I guess even in elementary school, I was a little bit interested in computers, and part of the reason was when I typed, my teachers could read what I was doing, and when I hand wrote it, they couldn't. And
Mm.
I used to get top mark every basically thing that you measure an elementary student on, except for handwriting. I would get like basically we won't fail you because we're not that mean. That was the grade that I would get,
Okay.
and so I basically since about the fourth grade I typed. And
Mm.
so I was just always on, and I would go down to the library. My mom worked at the elementary school, and so she would work. She was the main secretary for the whole build. That's the person that actually runs the school. In case you're ever curious how schools work, the main secretary is actually the person who does everything. But I would go there. Well, she would work extra hours, and I would just go into the library and type all of my reports or papers or whatever. And so I started playing with these things. I was like, what else can these things do? And I just started kind of, you'd break it and you'd be like, well, I got to fix it so that it
Yeah.
works for the students. And then you kind
Yeah.
of go through a break fix loop, and then eventually it was, okay, how do I share files and games and stuff like that with my friends? And you learn about how do you split things across floppy disks and, and then compression and then, um, base 64 encode so you can get on news groups and like grab things off news. Like it was all of that. And it was all in purpose of just like collaborating with like a couple of my peers and our friends. It had nothing to do with this is a career. And then at some point in high school, a math teacher basically decided to do a 2-week workshop after school on how to build a web page, and I decided to sign up for that. And
Mm.
we were writing HTML in Notepad, and worked out fine. And then he ended up kind of launching a CS curriculum in my high school, so I took like C++ and Visual J++, I think was one of them at the time, and it was just stuff like that. So I did that, and then eventually went off to school. I went to school for music originally, and basically I wanted to be a recording engineer, songwriter kind of person. And what I learned was I was very good in the local area I grew up at. I was nothing compared to the people even at the university. Like I was just not skilled to the level that they were. But when it came to computers, I was more skilled than the people that were majoring in computer science. And so I was like, oh, I can just go do this. And I think it's going to pay better. I won't have to like my best case scenario, I think, working in the music industry would have been to get coffee for somebody better than me. And I think,
Sure. Sure.
and I, then I kind of looked at the overall financial outcomes and was like, there's money in this role. And kind of growing up with not everything that I wished for all the time. I didn't have like a terrible childhood or anything, but I always wanted more money, and decided, hey, I'll go for the higher upside, and I'll be able to afford the guitars and toys that I want if I work in tech. And more or less that worked out. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we were talking about this right before we got started about like the money thing, right? Like, and I feel, and this is probably an exaggeration, but I like it, so I'm gonna roll with it. I feel like people in tech, we're basically just grown up children. Like we have toys, and like I feel like sometimes that we work in tech to justify our spending habits around the toys that we like. Like you talked about music, for instance, we were talking about guitars before we got started. Like, you know, if I can buy things that I want, like I'm gonna like if my job enables me the ability to buy things that I want, like it's just one of those plus ones of the job, right? But I also think that there's this thing about technology, and I think you alluded to a little bit, like the discovery of finding new things. Like I think that's what drives a lot of us people in technology is like we're generally curious people. So my question for you is like, what was the one thing that you remember most about when you were first getting started with technology that you just found super fascinating? Like the thing that kind of, whether it's, you kind of mentioned a few of them, like, encryption and compression and kind of in community building. Like, what was the one thing that really grabbed you? Like, was it as simple as like, hey, this thing is doing things that doesn't make sense to my brain, like sand and glass and whatever should not be this intelligent? Like, what was it specifically? Do you remember?
I think it was connectivity.
Yeah.
Like I could talk to other people that weren't like, the 12 phone numbers I had memorized in my best
Sure.
friends.
Sure.
I could talk to people across the country. I could talk to people across the world, and they might have a similar interest to me. Like, say there's a band I really liked. I could find other people that liked them, and maybe my friends didn't because they hadn't heard of them or they were just thought, I was nuts or whatever. But like, I could find other people that were really into that band. Or, um, I remember like the first time I played like Ultima Online. It was like I'm playing a game and I can walk up to somebody and talk to them and they talk back. It's not like just a sprite that's giving you canned
Yeah.
dialogue. Like that was so fascinating to me. And so then you start thinking about, well, how does that work? Like
Yeah.
how and then you think, well, I never really thought about how a phone call. And so that maybe you dig into that a little bit. And some of the stuff I didn't care about that much. Like I don't understand acoustic coupling from. I've never thought about it. Other than it makes weird
Sure.
noises. And
Sure. Sure.
but but eventually I did learn how like to use Kermit and Z modem and stuff like that to siphon an internet connection at my university because they didn't have broadband my freshman year at
Mm.
my university. So, but they did have a Unix server, so I figured out how to use that.
Yeah.
I could tell that input and then siphon it over for the rest of my network. And it was, I guess usually it was a means to an end. Also, it was just the connectivity was the part
Yeah.
that fascinated me, and so I would dig into that and try and find different ways. And I learned that there was this thing called news groups, and there was HTTP, and there was
Yeah.
mail, and there was Gopher, and there were all these different protocols. And I was like, well, who uses which ones of these for why? And so I started, kind of digging into that. And it's nearly every day these days that I wish Gopher was still a primary protocol because I don't think you could serve ads over it nearly as well as you can do
Sure. Sure.
on HTML. So
Yeah. No, I mean that's interesting. I think we'll need to get back to that. But so, but like I think there's something interesting too about you talk about community, right? And you were kind of going into these different communities and having conversations and learning something. I'm curious, like, was it pretty was it pretty identifiable to you? Like there were certain types of people that were in certain types of communities. Like, I think of, this is just a gross overstatement. It's like crusty old engineer like this. Like I remember I had a college professor that was really big into FreeBSD, and you could tell with it by looking at him that he was into FreeBSD. If you get what I'm saying, right?
yeah,
Like, and
yeah,
I don't mean that in any negative way, but it's like some people have like a very specific demeanor, right? And did you
yeah.
recognize similar things?
Not really for a
Yeah.
long time. I think um, I came to like the Linux and Unix space in college. So I'd
Sure.
been kind of really in computers for 6 or 7 years before I'd really even played with that. The only thing I had heard of was you want this Apache web server. Like that was the thing that people kept telling me about.
Yeah.
And they were like, but it runs better on Linux. And I was like, okay, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like I ran whatever the heck is on Windows or
Yeah. Sure.
and figured all that out. And so like to me, there wasn't quite this identity of different pockets of tech. It was just kind of like, are you a nerd or not? And every nerd I
Yeah.
knew
Yeah.
was basically they were just more advanced Windows users, and I was definitely in that. And then maybe I'd meshed with a Mac at some point, but these were back in like the Performa days where it was still pre Intel Mac, pre OS 10,
Yeah.
and so there were a few Mac people that were like very much that was their identity, and they were weird to me. And
Sure.
not just because I didn't understand the pride in it. I don't feel like you can do anything better, but
Mm.
it is more expensive. And
Yeah.
so, but then I got to college. I learned GCC and grep and Vim and all this. And like, I think Vim was actually one of the things that really opened up my eyes where I was like, oh my gosh, there's an entire sim here design that I don't have, like, there's no inefficient movement of my hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
incredible. And so, and then from there, once I found Linux, I was like, this is so much. I could understand it to a degree that I never could in Windows. I just couldn't dig through and figure out how something worked. I knew that when you recited this incantation, you got the output you wanted, but I
Sure.
didn't really know what that incantation did and how it happened. And
Yeah.
so, in Linux, you could run strace on it, just see the system call all the way down to the kernel, and then you can go read about those in the man pages and figure out how it's all working. And I did a lot.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I agree with everything that you're saying. I also subscribe really to like, if you continue to dig, you'll continue to be educated as it pertains to like how things work. Like I have a friend of mine who always talks about like the levels of abstraction that are in tech, right? Like, they're all the way down from like, oh, you're writing assembly code against the actual machine, and then you get up in the now you have high level languages, and now you have kind of what we have now, right? And he always says it's good to know that the stack you're working on, it's good to be well informed about the stack below the stack you're working on at the minimum, because then you kind of understand, okay, why is this thing particular not working? um but I'm generally curious, like you mentioned something a bit earlier about, um, you know, there are people that kind of fall into camps, right, back then. And I've been thinking about this for a while recently. Do you think that still exists to the extreme that it did 15, 20 years ago? I feel like now we've started to delve a little bit into this more polyglot technology sort of thing. Yes, there are people that are still hardcore Windows, there are still people that are hardcore Linux, people that have their tools of choice. But I feel like in technology, we're being forced, good, bad, or indifferent, to kind of know a lot of everything. Like, oh, you need to know, how to run, like, even if you're a Windows user, you need to know how to do things in WSL. You need to know how Docker containers work, which is a completely different concept to like most modern operating systems. You need to know how different tooling works, and you know different programming languages. So I guess my overarching question is, do you think that we still have like those, I guess, those camps of people that only know their specific thing and really don't have a need or necessity to kind of learn other things?
Yes, I think we still have that. I just think the axis of which you divide those camps has changed because it used to
Sure.
kind of be, I'm a Mac person or I'm a Linux person or FreeBSD or Windows or whatever, and kind of in the Slashdot era where it was Microsoft was evil and Apple was interesting and
Sure,
Linux
sure.
was amazing. And now I think you have more division around the lines of the technology that's not the operating system. But like you mentioned, Docker containers, and there are people that have made their whole career and their whole identity around CNCF and CNCF projects and Kubernetes and all of that. And it's like, if that's all you know, you can apply it to just about anything, which is fine,
Hmm.
except it's not always the best tool for what you're doing.
Sure,
And
sure.
but if that's all you know, that's the tool you're going to reach for. And so there's a lot of very interesting, I'll say as a kind word, to describe the way that certain people are doing certain flows because they're so ingrained with my identity and my resume and my value is all around my ability to use a container. If you get the same thing with like Node developers, they're
Yeah,
using Node.js all day and they're like, why would I need anything else, a full stack language? And it's like, well, sometimes blocking IO is amazing and you want it. And other
yeah,
times it's like, I don't want to load this all into memory right now. I actually want to run only the parts of the program that are useful right now in memory. And it's, it's not to say that Node sucks. It doesn't. It's just, it's good for certain things. It's not great for everything. But I think you still see some tribalism around like, hey, I know Node, therefore I'm a great web developer or I do mobile
sure.
apps or whatever. And like, none of that's wrong. It's just, it's still people's kind of self-selecting and opting into their camps. And
Yeah,
I've used all these tools and like there are certain camps that I played with Java before. I am never going to sit down and intentionally write a bunch of Java. It's just
sure,
not going to happen.
sure.
So yeah,
Yeah.
doesn't mean Java sucks.
Yeah, no,
So
and I agree with that. I think too, and this kind of is double clicking into your point. It's like, we have tools that we're comfortable with, and we'll use that tool as a hammer looking for any nail possible,
mhm.
right? Like, and I'm very guilty of it. Like, I have, I think I've joked about this 1,000 times in the show, so I apologize. Like, I've learned Go like 15 times because I've learned it. I've gone through an experiment. I've done the process, but like whenever I want to build a new thing, I always deviate towards the languages or the frameworks that I'm comfortable with. Even if Go is the right one, I default to something else, right? Because for whatever reason, like Go I haven't really grabbed onto it and really got value. And every time you go back into Go, things are a little bit different, at least. And then you run into situations where like, oh, okay, well, I have to learn this thing all over again. Um, because for whatever reason it's not sticking in my brain like maybe some other languages are. Um, like you mentioned also kind of the this is the way that how we should do things, like the very opinionated way of doing tech. I find it very fascinating because, you mentioned like Node, and I love Node too. I love people that write things in JavaScript and TypeScript. But I mean, I feel like there's a level of obfuscation in some ways we build things that is so far above, like for instance, like if you actually look at npm and what it's doing, like it's insane. Like, you have C++ running crazy, you have like custom wheels being generated, like you have all this stuff, right? And if you don't know what it's doing and you do like an npm build and it doesn't work, you're like, okay, I guess I'll just delete my node modules folder and start again, right? And sometimes I think is that the way that we should be building software? And that's a different question for now, where it's like, okay, are we building software anywhere? Are we just prompting? But I'm curious, like from your take, it's like, how do we educate ourselves on the different areas of tech that are adjacent to what we're working on? Because I think that we're very guilty, good, bad, or indifferent, of like focusing on whatever we need to accomplish, and the stuff that's around it is like not as important to learn.
Yeah, I guess to me, it's kind of, I always want awareness of capabilities. That's the way that I
Sure.
usually look at my education, is like, what is this? What was the problem it was set out to solve? Because in a lot of cases, you just see a piece of tech and you're like, I don't get it. I don't quite understand
Yeah.
it. And so, understanding why, but I think kind of knowing capabilities of adjacent technologies, like I keep up basically reading about things, and I might bookmark something and say, this is interesting. And I may never come back
Mhm.
and look at it, but I like to know kind of what's in the ecosystems that I play in and what's directly and maybe even secondarily adjacent to it. But you know, the amount of technology you can consume is infinite, and so like you have to kind of draw a boundary either intentionally or unintentionally. And so I usually am kind of looking at things that are close to my space and things like that. And then, I'm sure there's been huge breakthroughs in the world of mainframe computing, but I,
Yeah.
haven't touched it in a long time. That's
Sure.
okay. And the same for, I would say, most of the Microsoft ecosystem. Like it's not a thing that I play in. It doesn't mean .NET sucks. It just means it's not a thing
Yeah.
that I touch all that often.
Well,
So
yeah. I mean, and if you don't get exposed to things, right? Like, to kind of be the other side of the coin. Like, I built like my entire career inside the Microsoft technology stack, right? And yes, that's growing. That's grown to like, it used to be
mhm.
like literally like just .NET and maybe some VB or whatever, and now it's like every programming language, whatever, right? And there's cloud and there's Linux involved. But like very much like when I try to do things, I think of things from a very specific lens that I've done in my career. And I think what's interesting is that I'm very fascinated by the people that have been able to kind of jump from different, I guess you can call them like categories of tech. And what I'm curious to learn from you is like, when did you find like the area of tech that you really attach yourself to? Like, I'd imagine, like, knowing your background a little bit, like, you've kind of deviated into one specific area or, one, I guess, category. Like, when did you realize there were areas of tech that were more, I guess, interesting to you than others?
I think it was in university.
Okay,
I was a CS major.
sure.
We were writing algorithms and data structures, all that kind of stuff. And I found myself more interested in the way the operating system worked than the way that the algorithm worked.
Mm,
I was less
mhm.
concerned about hyper efficient sort algorithms or indexing on databases or whatever. I was more like, how does this thing run, 18,000 processes at once?
Sure,
Or like,
yeah.
how does it keep those all in memory? Like, to me, that was more fascinating. And so what I found was I was a CS major that wanted to be a sysadmin.
Mm,
And so I was. That was my first job out of school. They hired me to go be an AIX system administrator. And I was like, I've never heard of AIX. I'm in. And that was IBM's Unix for those that don't know. It still exists. It's actually still pretty great in a lot of ways. But and I went there. I went to Caterpillar. That was the construction company. They basically needed AIX admins, and I went in there and learned a lot about AIX. And within 6 months, aren't we doing most of this on Linux? You could do it for like a 20th of the cost.
sure, yeah.
Um, And I ended up just kind of asking that at one of our new employee orientation things to whoever was leading the thing at the time. And I just raised my hand and asked the question. And he's like, "Can I talk to you afterwards?" And I was like, "Oh boy, what did I do?" Um, and like the other people were like, "Oh, you're in trouble." And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Tell me more about this. This is fascinating. You can save like 95% of our costs. Like, what are
Yeah.
you talking
Yeah.
about?" And we had played with Linux a little bit in like mail servers and DNS, which is where it, snuck in first everywhere. And then I was like, these applications, I think I listed like 15 different applications that I was, the sysadmin for in AX. I was like, these can run on Linux and you could have this migrated in a quarter and you would be saving all these lease costs and all this. Um, and I didn't know I was talking to the CIO of Caterpillar at the time. I didn't really understand. And that was like 7 levels above me or 8, in the
Yeah.
org chart or whatever. And he was just like, can you come into my office on Monday? And I was like, okay. And so like, I tell my boss, hey, I have to skip our staff meeting. The CIO wants me to come into the meeting. He's like, I've never had a meeting with the CIO. And like
Oh,
my
geez.
boss's boss was like, I've never had a meeting with the CIO. And so, I started talking to him about these different Linux ideas, and we ended up like Caterpillar went really forward into Linux. And I don't think I was the only catalyst there, but I think there were others, and I think he was kind of getting triangulated signal and saying, oh my gosh, we should lean into this. And but what I realized then was we had this team of system administrators. There were like 18 of us, huge system administration team. There were maybe 1,200 servers, something like that. And I was like, this just seems super inefficient. And I was kind of working through it, and what I realized I loved doing was automating things. I was like,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you program a computer to solve computer problems? Like, and I guess this was my CS background and meeting to my sysadmin background or my sysadmin job. I just started writing computer programs to do everything.
Yeah.
It wasn't that hard to loop across a series of machines and make changes, test them ahead of time, automate, whatever. And then I started building applications around like inventory management and orchestration. And today it would look more like I guess they would call it an IDP, like a developer portal or things like that. I was building that for the system administration team, central asset database, and they eventually pulled me out and formed a new team that was basically the team underneath the sysadmins to basically enable them to be better at their jobs. And then yeah, and then I transferred down to Nashville. They had a financial products division from Caterpillar, and they were doing more with open source stuff, and I thought that was more interesting. And plus, I got to move from Central Illinois to Nashville, which was a better place to
Yeah.
live, in my
Sure.
opinion. Um, and from there, I met. I actually I had replaced a bunch of people that had left the company, and I met them all. I happened to meet them all at a bar one night. It was completely by chance. And they were awesome. Like these people were so great, and one of them was the founder of Puppet. And so I ended up talking with him for a while. I ended up talking with another founder of Puppet who was also in the area. And we had been talking on and off for a couple of years. And eventually they decided to get me to come work there. So I joined at like employee 30 or 35, somewhere in there. And so I went from a company of 100,000 people to a company of 35 people,
Yeah.
which was going from enterprise to startup. Like it was the biggest, transition you could possibly have. And I was really excited about that because it was all about automation. Like this was literally like systematizing, making system admins better at their job. I was like, this is what I do. It's just at a bigger scale with like more resources and more mission around it. And so, um, I worked at Puppet for 8 years and loved it. I I was the first release engineer there. Like I was packaging and
Yeah.
building all the software, like to get out to the different distros, porting it to different architectures. Like I ported Ruby to IBM AIX, and I ported Ruby to several other, kind of oddball things like network switches and stuff like that. And that was fun. Like I really enjoyed that. But also growing teams and leading and hiring and, all those kinds of things that were just awesome. I had so much more autonomy that I was ever
Yeah.
going to have at Caterpillar. And there was just a freedom. There was like a trust. It was like, you want to be in management. That's a rare thing for us in the startup. You go run,
Yeah.
do what you need to do. And I couldn't have asked for a better like trial by fire. It was awesome. And so, did that for a long time. And then eventually, leadership changes, CEO leaves, founder CEO leaves. Things were less fun. And CircleCI reached out and they were like, hey, we're looking for somebody to run our platform area. It was a VP role, and I was pretty excited about that. And I was very aware of what they were doing and why they were doing it, and I thought that was really cool. And so ended up going there. And that was more automation again, but it was more like
Yeah.
developer enablement instead of sysadmin enablement. It was like, okay, I want to automate you, knowing that your stuff you have confidence to deploy, you have confidence to roll out your systems, all these things. And so kind of the same problem space, just slightly augmented at the audience. And And then coming to Flox is kind of the same thing. It's like, how do I make people using the software development lifecycle more productive, more reproducible? Like taking a bunch of my release engineering background, applying it to the SDLC. Good stuff. So I guess my overall theme has been, how do I make other people more productive through software?
Sure.
So
Yeah, I mean,
long answer.
no, 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 no. And there's one through line through it though, right? And you said it kind of at the beginning. It's like, and I think there's a lot of technologists that are very guilty of this. We see a situation where like, why am I doing this? Like program a computer to do this, right? A program to do this. And I think we're all guilty of it. We all have like little scripts or little like apps that we build. And you mentioned something that was kind of fascinating. It's like you've always kind of wanted to be like in the system administration space, right? And there's always like this very interesting I get conflict isn't the right word, but very interesting kind of like collaboration mechanism between developers and system administrators, right? And I think over the last 10 years, we've seen sort of those roles have to collaborate more and more, which I think is a really, really good thing. We get, you talked about CircleCI, right? They're like a DevOps platform. And like you think of like DevOps as kind of being that inflection point of like when developers and ops people actually have to start working together and like even new roles get created. And the reason why I kind of I do that whole little diatribe there is, so what is it about automation that has kept you so fascinated? Is it just the idea of, or it's just like, is it the trope of like lazy engineer or lazy developer, or lazy technologist, or is it like the fact that it's like there's some efficiency and elegance to the fact that it's like offloading work to things that are probably better suited to do that work?
I think it's more the latter.
Yeah,
Like when I speak, at a conference about automation, which is, done dozens and dozens of times, like most people think you want to automate something because you want it quicker.
sure.
And that's not the reason. The reason I want it is I want it consistent. I'd rather be consistent than correct, because if I'm consistent across everything, correction is a one-step operation versus like if there's 17 different permutations of how something's happening, I have 17 different changes I need to make. And so consistency is really, really important. And I think that's my fascination with it. But there's also just like, I mean, I remember like the first time I had like a full Puppet catalog bootstrapping a system, and I just sat there and watched it. And I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I took a system from nothing, waited, the 17 minutes to do the complete Puppet install, do everything that needed to do. And then the system was done. Like it was ready to do everything I needed it to do. That's just like, I don't feels good. I don't know how else to say it.
yeah.
Like that was awesome. And I still get those moments sometimes where it's like you automate something and you're like, oh, this just worked. That's so great. And then you can stamp it out and do it n more times. Like that's really, really neat. But I think the consistency is the most important thing to me.
Yeah.
Because I used to be able to, like when I was at Caterpillar and when I was in Nashville, I could tell who built the server I was on by logging in and running 3 commands.
Mm,
And like to me, that was a complete failure mode. Um,
interesting.
just be able to see like, okay, is this editor installed? Okay, is this thing in user local? Is, like, are these environment variables set? If they were, I could tell you who built it.
Yeah.
And it was just like that. So like I wrote a whole unit testing framework on servers before we delivered them to customers and be like, no, you have to take out all the personalizations. Like the standard is this.
Yeah.
And, so that was consistency, I guess, would be my number one thing there.
Yeah, I mean, and especially now we talk about, standardization across different things. Like you have, you know, y- it's funny now that you're talking about a lot of things that, you know, guardrails or processes that you put in place to sort of make things standardized. And now we have this whole like concept in the industry of standardization of environments, right? Like this whole like platform engineering thing. And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts, because how I see is platform engineering is kind of like the next iteration of DevOps. So like we had DevOps, and then we have sort of like, okay, we're adding security to the DevOps sort of nomenclature. We need to worry about security as a part of our continuous integration and continuous deployment. And now it's like, okay, we're not just talking about shipping apps or shipping environments. We're shipping systems. We're shipping developer environments. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts as, you know, what's your take on platform engineering in general, and how much does it deviate away from the just automate things from a standardization process to a more of a compliance and ensuring that everybody's doing the exact same thing the same way?
I mean, to me, platform engineering was just kind of renaming the things that already existed.
Sure.
And some say it's DevOps in the final form, and I'm like, I don't know about that.
Until 2 years from now, where there's a new
Right,
final
when it's got
form,
a
right?
different name.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and that's it. DevOps in in some ways was very revolutionary of trying to like collaborate between the developer and the operator, but in other ways it was kind of a lot of places ended up basically just renaming their ops team the DevOps team,
Yep.
and congratulations, now you have a new name. So that to me wasn't super meaningful in all regards, but it's not to say that boss failed. It's to say that I think the principles were sound, the implementation sometimes lacked. But with platform engineering, like my main goal when I ran platform at CircleCI was reduce the amount of code that is unique per service.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to do that was I wanted consistency across everything. And if you're developer on team one, but you have to get shifted to team two, and that happens, as much as we all say people should always stay on the same team and not have to switch what workload they work on. Let's
Sure.
be real, it
Yeah.
doesn't happen
Right.
that way.
Yeah. Right.
And so if you have to switch from team one to team two or service one to service two, how much of your knowledge transfers from I worked on service one to now I need to work on service two?
Yeah.
And I kept trying to drive that number northbound, because I wanted, like, the way you connect and pool a database connection should not be a differentiator across two services. Like if you're using the same language, hopefully you're using the exact same library and it's been tested in the exact same ways. And there's just so many places where that's not the case. And for us, it was, okay, what code is reused? How much is business? Like if business logic should be the only differentiator between these two services in my ideal state. We didn't get there all the way, but we had measurements of like, how much are you using this set of libraries? Are you up to date on this set of libraries that we provide internally? And so my platform team was a software engineering team. We were not an operator team. And that was the
Yeah.
difference. Like, and, this was, I mean, it was 6 or 8 different teams of humans, but like my output was software more so than, you can turn in a ticket to us or whatever. It was like, if I can't give you an API or a library, we have not completed the job.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people that say they're doing platform engineering, it's like, oh, we just turn in a ticket to get these new instances online to the platform team. And I'm like, that's just an order taker, which is like fine. A lot of places that might be the right amount of efficiency you need if that doesn't happen that often. But for us at CircleCI, we were going between, let's call it 1,000 instances and 30,000 in a day at times, or 50,000. And so you had to have very repeatable process that worked out well, and services that scaled and monitored and all that kind of stuff. And so, so platform engineering was much more of a real software engineering capability. It wasn't, it wasn't just, hey, we have the compliance team and we have the ops team in here and we call it platform. So that was my goal around platform. And I think today, as you look at platform, it's like, well, is it data platform in there as well, or is there an AI platform or whatever? And I hope so. And there's definitely operational characteristics that you still need, but I would always look at what's your output. Is your output libraries and APIs, or is it labor? Because if it's labor, you haven't fully adopted the platform.
Sure. Yeah, and I think too, like this whole concept of platform engineering that I've always found fascinating is like standardizing a developer environment. Like, I very much subscribe to the idea that like developer onboarding or in technologist onboarding in general is way too cumbersome, right? But I also feel like it takes a little bit of the personality out of what we do. Like I mean, look, I'll be the first one to say, like, as a developer, like I like things a very specific way. And if I'm if I'm, all of my environments are going to look the exact same as everybody else's, and then I have to go in and have to make all of my changes. Like, it almost seems like I have to do additional work to like build on top of the existing, I guess, template to be able to do the work the way that I want to do it. And I'm fascinated, sort of like on the ops side, you have the same thing, right? Like everybody has their tools they like to use and their script. Like I have a friend who always talks about they used to have like a USB stick that had like all of their favorite PowerShell scripts on it, right? Or their favorite Bash scripts. And they would go from job to job with their little USB stick, which I think is just it's so cute, but it's like, it's how it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, where is the level of, giving people the ability to build things the way they want versus standardization and compliance? Because it's a very healthy balance, right? You need to have that. But at the same time, it's like, if you're a company, you care about one side of it substantially more than the other.
I don't know that you actually do, because I think there's a certain amount of productivity you expect. Like engineering resources, humans are usually the most expensive part of your payroll.
Oh, sure.
If you're like a software firm, or a technology company, if you're something different, it's not going to be, maybe not the most expensive. Like if you're a capital intensive operation, it might not be the most expensive, but it's still not cheap. And so how do you get the maximum productivity out of them? But maximum productivity, if you look at that, like if you actually try and graph it, happiness is a component into that. And so like if you feel constrained or overridden with bureaucracy or systems and tools that don't allow you to work the way you want to work, you're not going to be maximally productive. And so I think what you kind of have to look at is how you're optimizing for productivity, and where must you take some concessions, and where can you afford to not put in your own guidelines and barriers. And so I did a lot of development for a while inside of containers. And I was
Mhm.
like, well, these are awesome because they're portable and you get layer reuse and all this kind of stuff. And eventually I kind of hated it. And it was because I found that I was making them Swiss cheese. I was bind mounting in my home directory or my source code, in my aliases and all, all these things. And it was just like, by the time I'm done with this, it's not really a container anymore. I'm taking that template that somebody gave me and then I'm customizing it heavily for my own usage.
Yeah.
And it still feels less good than if I was doing it from myself from the ground up. And so, um, that was actually one of the things that kind of drew me to Flox. Was they have this way of basically delivering consistent dependency management packages, environment variables, things like that in a thing called a Flox environment, but it's not a container. And so it's like, if I already have a bunch of my favorite scripts in my home bin directory or user local bin or whatever,
Yeah.
those are still available. They're still there. I have shell aliases, I have shortcuts in Vim or my Vim plugins or whatever. That's all still there. I just need to load in the context for the project I'm working on. And so like if I'm working on mobile app one, I can just cd into that directory, run Flox activate, and now I have all the dependencies and all the software versions that work on mobile app one. And if I'm on Mac and my colleagues on Linux, it doesn't matter because the Flox environment works cross-platform, cross-architecture. Like it kind of was the best of both worlds for me. It was okay. So we have the dependencies that we need, like the must-haves. We have the environment variables that are required. Maybe it's like an API key to talk to Stripe or whatever.
Sure.
And um, and those can load in securely. It's not like you have to have them in plain text, but like and your set of API keys, maybe some hooks when you activate, check to see if this is running or start a service or whatever. We have a services manager, like, but all of that it felt like developing on my local laptop, but in a standardized way that
Hmm.
other people could use. And like, to me, that was like finding that happy medium. And that was one of the reasons that really drew me into Flox. And then if you just have like the 15 scripts you want everywhere, you can just have your own environment that you can
Yeah.
pull in and layer on top of that and be like, okay, here's I'm going to pull down the environment for working on that mobile app one, but I'm also going to have my stuff loaded that has all of my favorite scripts in it. And you can have both of them active at the same time. So just do that.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, and I'll apologize if this is a gross summarization of what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But like, I think of the concept of like a dev container, right? Where it's like you have a predefined set of basically things that I want when I build an app, right? I see Flox as a more um, robust implementation of the same sort of idea, right? Where hey, I have some sort of mechanism that defines my developer environment. And whenever I want to create new version of that in developer environment, it's just references it directly from there. Like I can have this particular version of Node. I can have these particular aliases like you were talking about. Is that a fair summarization or is that just simplification of something you just
yeah, I mean,
said?
it is pretty simple. It is pretty simplified, but it's not wrong.
Yeah.
So, I used or dev containers for a while, and
Yeah.
parts of it were awesome, and parts of it, like I said, I felt like I was making it Swiss cheese and stuff like that. So, um, but I think you get a lot of consistency based on the way that Flox does things. And then the other
Yeah.
part is it's not just in development. Like we can press an artifact that is production ready from that, and it also has complete provenance of all the software that where it came from. What version was it? What version of libc are you using? Like, it creates a full software closure. Like it doesn't inherit things from the OS, even though, like I said, I can have my own scripts in the home bin or whatever. Um, when you actually go to package it, we can put in warnings to be like, hey, you're using things that are outside this system. Do you know that? Are you okay with that? Things like that, so that it will be portable for the next user. And I think that's kind of one of the goals there. But and then also just being able to say what's going into this. A lot of cases, the instructions for a repository on GitHub might be brew install this or apt-get or
Yeah.
yum or
Yeah.
whatever. It's like, well, you're gonna get three different versions of software if you have three different machines. And so
Yeah.
for us, that was, we're like, no, you get this exact version and it works on Mac or Linux, and we don't care if your Linux is, Ubuntu or Red Hat or whatever. Is it a Linux kernel? Cool, we can work with it.
Sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, so I'm fascinated by this, and you don't have to like lay out all the company secrets, but like how does it work? Do you basically have like are you basically a wrapper for all those things and you standardize across all the different package managers, or is there some other mechanism that you're doing? Because like, your point is valid, right? Okay, if I apt-get, if I yelm, if I brew, like it's all going to give me a different piece of software, right?
Hmm.
So if I was to Flox install I don't know, npm, for instance.
Hmm.
What exactly is that what is actually happening behind the hood or under the hood to get me sort of a standardized version of that software regardless of how I'm getting it?
Yeah, yeah. So for just to back up a little bit, we are based on a technology called Nix, which is
Sure.
a giant open source project. It's the sixth largest project on GitHub, and it's basically this set of functional packages. And functional basically in this case means side effect free. That's what you have
Sure.
to think about. Is like when I install something, it doesn't pollute the native OS or anything like that. It's in its own partition. Usually it's like /nix. Um, I guess own folder. It doesn't have to be its own partition, but like, and you install all this software, and it's all addressed by basically a hash, and so it's unique. So you can have 17 different versions of Postgres in there. It's fine, and then you choose which one you want active in your environment. And when you go to install something, basically it says, "Hey, I'm looking for." You said, npm. Okay, I'm looking for npm, and then for us, we'll send it out to our catalog resolver, and it'll be like, this person's asking for npm. What other constraints do they have? And it could be, well, you already have these packages installed in this environment, and if so, we want them to be contemporaneous so that you have API
Yeah.
guarantees. But if there's nothing else there, it's going to be like, we're just going to give you the latest npm, and that will be the anchor point for the contemporaneousness of the next set of packages or whatever. And then but we also look up and say, okay, is this buildable? Is it available for this architecture? Does this person have permissions to see custom packages that could be named npm? All that kind of stuff is going on under the hood. But basically, you get delivered an npm. It gets put in /nix/store and only activated when you activate a Flox environment. And so most of the time, it's just payload sitting on your disk. And
Yeah.
if you delete it, it'll just get reinstalled the next time you run Flox to activate it. It'll just go grab it again because it's a loop like that. So you can garbage collect. It's not really that big of a deal. I like to think of it a lot as like we have this giant data warehouse of packages, and then you put a view on it for what you want to use in your
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way that Flox works with software management.
Yeah. I mean, that analogy works great. Like, I think, you know, one of the things as developers or operators or whatever role in technology, like, we always need to be mindful of is like, what am I actually getting? Because I
Hmm.
think that, we were talking about this a bit earlier about like npm packages, right? Like, I have no idea what's in there. I just trust it because other people are using it, or it passes all my transitive dependency checks or whatever it is, right? But like, at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to go into GitHub and look at the source code for every single npm package that my apps are building or apps are using, right? Because I'll be here all day. So if I can basically have some sort of um, this isn't the right phrase, some sort of police that basically says, like, this is the version of this package or the version of this thing that's going to give you the least surface area for attack or whatever you want to call
Hmm.
it, minimum no CVEs or whatever it is. It's going to make my life as a developer or my life as an operator a bit less stressful because I know that I'm not going to be getting something that could be potentially dangerous.
Yeah, and I think so. All the packages that we base our base catalog on are from Nix packages, which again has eyeballs all over it from different contributors. And I guess having spent a lot of time in distro engineering, the various way different packages managers handle trust is fascinating. For instance, I have published probably 12 or 15 npm packages. No one has ever looked at the source code of those other than me. Maybe
Sure.
one other person that submitted a PR. But like those aren't vetted in any way. Whereas if you're going to get a package into Nix or into Red Hat or whatever, those are vetted heavily. There's a lot of people that look over that. There's maybe an automated review process that'll kick out the first 15 things that are wrong. Um, and then you may have more vetting of, hey, we've validated the signature, we validated the SHA, we've validated the compile flags, all of these different things. And so from that, you have a collection from the masses that's a little more one bad actor isn't going to deliver something that's terrible, or probably isn't going to deliver something that's terrible. Whereas again, like a system like npm, I could put a node module up today that would just rm-rf/, and you know it would get published. Like I don't think there's any tech in there at all that would prevent that. And whereas if I did that in Nix, that pull request would get flagged really quickly. So um, and well before it was merged. And I think that's maybe the difference is, and like, I mean, the same thing would happen if I, submitted to Canonical or Debian or whatever. They would all be like, no, you're not doing this. And I just think that there's a lot more robustness around that. And when you want to start with trust, you want to anchor it on something that you have, higher degrees of confidence in. then some of the, like, I would say that some of the language ecosystems are fascinating because you have such a low barrier to publish. And like,
Yeah.
Go is just like, you just have a GitHub project somewhere. It's like, well, I
Yep.
can put anything in there. And so, whereas like these distros do have more of a conformance policy and more, okay, we've validated that the license is, allows for redistribution and SHA signing and, all those kinds of things. And so, that's where it starts. And then from us, if we have to add packages in or you have to publish them yourself, we assume that if you publish it yourself, you're trusting it because you're the only one that can install it. We can't
Sure.
install it. So, um, you know, but that's basically the long and the short out of it is kind of trust. But we also, we record where that software came from. It has complete provenance. It has a software bill of materials that comes with it, all that kind of stuff. So from a compliance standpoint, it's pretty easy to say this is what's going on at any stage of the SDLC. That
Yeah.
works out well.
No, I mean
So.
that's helpful. I appreciate it. I think, one of the things too that's been fascinating to me, at least in this space where it's like, looking at like you mentioned, it's like you've written a bunch of NPM packages and nobody's actually looked at that code, which I think is totally fine. And honestly, like it's the preference, right? Um, I'd love to get your thoughts too, as we're getting into this new world where most of the code that people are leveraging for applications are not read by anybody because they're generated by code source generators, right? Whether it's AI or whatever. And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts as, how do we harden that? Because I think that they're, similar to like an npm package that nobody looks at, there's a lot of, look at code, or put a prompt in, it builds, the performance on it isn't bad, it passes my unit test, so I'm going to ship it, right? So how can we ensure that we're not going to fall into this pit of despair where, we're just trusting these systems, these non-deterministic systems to generate code when I'm the person that needs to eventually be responsible if something goes wrong?
I mean, that's like the fundamental question in the industry right now, right?
Yeah,
It's and so I think you're totally great to ask it, but I think I'm going to counterpoint this with like
sure.
advancements. And when's the last time you cracked open one of the passes of a compiler and looked at object code or looked at the assembly it generated before it
Sure.
went to machine
Sure.
code? Like you just trust it. And so you got to the point where I'm pretty sure the compiler isn't injecting terrible things into my software.
Sure.
And are we going to get to that point with AI generated code? And I think the answer is probably, but
Yeah.
I don't know that it's going to happen in a fast enough. Like I think the adoption rate is outpacing the safety rate, if that makes sense. But I think basically the only thing you can do right now is treat all code as hostile.
Mm,
You have to just treat it as it is likely an attack vector. It is likely an entrance vector, and you have to basically say, how do I isolate this process or this running code from the next set of running code? And a lot of people think when I say that, I mean production. I don't. I mean production and laptops and everything else, because don't tell me you don't have credentials and stuff on your laptop to log into different systems, and that could be traversal attacked and pivoted and all that. So, and so basically, how do you treat all code as hostile? And I think that's a really hard problem.
yeah.
But it's fascinating. It's a huge business opportunity for the entire sector. And you've seen like Anthropic releasing sandboxing within Claude, and you've seen Cursor just launch sandboxing within Cursor, or maybe somewhat recently. I don't know how
Sure.
recently, but like, and so, okay, you have sandboxes for these agents when you're developing code, but what about your running? Or what about, you're running a review agent? Well, can your review agent make changes? And if it can make changes, can it make bad changes? And
Yeah.
if it can make bad changes, can it execute like an RM-RF on something? Or, just send me anything that looks like a Bitcoin key over to this port, or,
Yeah.
whatever. And I just think we have to kind of look at all code as hostile. And so from a lot of the developer being kingmaker for the last 15 years of like developers drive everything going on in the technical state,
Yeah.
I think now you have to kind of swing the pendulum back a little bit and say, okay, actually you want gates and control points to enter production or to enter QA or staging or leave the laptop or maybe even get on the laptop depending on your level of risk concern. And that means that now it's time for the operator, that persona, whether you want to call them DevOps or operator or platform engineer or whatever, they have to have a little more control and power to be able to
Yeah.
say, we can't do this right now. We're not comfortable with this. And you have to be able to explain why, because comfort's a feeling, but you might be able to say, hey, you haven't passed the 18 point instant. You've only got
Sure.
15 of them passing right now. And so to me, it's kind of a rise of operations again. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, this is the second major rise of operations in my career, at least that the way that I would describe it in the arc. The first one was Sarbanes-Oxley. And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was, for a while, it used to be developers just threw stuff at operators, and operators kind of made it work, and they wouldn't even make code changes or whatever because they were like, these developers don't know what they're doing, and they would be like, well, to run in this on this web server, I have to change this environment variable, or I have to change this, routine to look for this port or this, whatever. And now it's more, um, and then it was, well, can you put this in production for me? I need separation of concerns. And it's like, well, now the person that can put it in production can't make a change to it. And so that
Yeah.
was the Sarbanes-Oxley end of it. And so then operators were like, okay, then I need to have kind of, you have to be this tall to ride the ride checks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm going to be responsible for being on call for it and I can't edit it, I need to know that
Yeah.
you've done better work. And I think we're kind of at that same impetus again. And the response to Sarbanes-Oxley eventually was DevOps. And it was basically, if these two shall never meet because they can't make changes and work together, we need to figure out a different collaborating model and operating model. And I think that, kind of the throw over the wall, but you can't make a change, led to DevOps. And why don't we work together, understand the empathy, understand what we're measured on, and we'll all do a better job together. And I think largely that was successful, until it became more of a marketing and like naming exercise than a methodology. And then now we have kind of the same thing with this AI code base where it's like, okay, we're all operators receiving this AI stuff because we don't know
Yeah.
what happened
Yeah.
exactly.
That's a
And
good
even if
point.
even if you read through it, code that looks syntactically correct and pretty doesn't mean it's not hostile.
Yeah.
And you know, I read stuff all the time, and I'm like, wow, that looks beautiful. That's better than I would have written. And then I go through it like again with a fine tooth comb, and I'm like, ooh, nope, there's a buffer overflow right there, or that variable is not cast properly, and you could send this input, and they would have this issue. And then other people are like, I just have different AI review it in different ways and look for different problems.
Yeah.
And that's great. You maybe should do that because I don't think that's a problem at all. I just don't know that that's the be all end all currently. At some point they will be, but I don't think it is there yet. So
Yeah, I mean, for anybody that's had to sit in like a cab or like a change advisory board meeting, like those things are just like they're check boxes, sure, but at the end of the day, they're there to basically prevent risk. I think that you make a really interesting point is like, in the future, whether that's 6 months or 5 years or 100 years from now, it's like we're all going to be eventually be more or less reviewers of things, similar to how operators in the past have been reviewers of things. But also, I'm curious from your standpoint because as a developer, at some points in my career, I felt like ops or whatever you want to call that sort of side of technology, whether it's sysadmins or whatever, they've kind of been like, and this is the most crass way to say it, kind of like sticks in the mud because they're worried about making sure that um, we're following compliance, we're limiting risk and things like that. And if you're a software company and you're all about velocity, like getting stuff out there as fast as possible, sometimes there's a conflict between like the engineering organizations, like we need to get things out as fast as possible, and the ops team's like we need to get things out there as fast as possible, but then doing it the right way. So I'm curious from your standpoint, is like, what is that? What is like the happy path in that particular regard, where it's like um, you don't want ops folks to kind of be the villains in the story, but at the same time, you also don't want developers to be able to basically, go into the AWS console and create a bunch of stuff and create IAM rules and all these sort of things, right? Like, what does the balance look like? Because obviously, if you put too much onus on one side of the pendulum, it's going to just cause problems for both sides.
yeah, I think this comes back to a lot of those good DevOps conversations. Like, what are you incentivized on, and what is your role? And traditionally ops measure more around stability, developers measure more around velocity. Well, those are generally add-ons because the more changes you make, allegedly, the less stable you will be. I would actually say that research does not back that up, but it's mostly that you want kind of to find that common ground of we're all operating this. And so
Yeah,
like you're operating it as a developer and you may be different concerns, but you don't want me to kick this back to you for a security failure on a scan. Because you don't want to switch context and jump back into, updating the Z digit on a Semver package. Like that's just not that important for a developer most of the time.
sure.
It's so just do it right. Like let's just have the right scanning up front. But uh, I think the operator needs to have business context, and that's actually kind of one of the bigger differences if you go back to like, because when I first got into sysadmins, there's kind of the BOFH, bastard operator from hell, like persona, which was basically these are our sticks in the mud, these are jerks, these are guys that sit in their basement, have big beards, and are trolls, and all these things, and I've done all those things. But Um, the thing is, they didn't care about the business at all in any of those like realistic things. They were like, I care about my computer, and I'm the gatekeeper of this computer, this Unix machine, or production, or whatever it is that they kind of had their fiefdom over. And I think if you actually understand what your company is trying to do and accomplish, we're trying to sell more insurance products, or we're trying to deliver more widgets, or whatever. If you understand that and you believe in that, you can work together and find the best way through that path together. One of the major issues that I found in my career, like one of the reasons I left enterprise, was at the end of the day at Caterpillar, I loved my team. I loved the tech I got to work on. The budget was amazing. I didn't care if we sold another tractor or not. It just
Sure.
didn't bother me at all. Like I was like, our biggest problem is counting the amount of money we have coming. Like that is, it's just not, I sell earth ripping equipment, and and they make lots of money. And like, it's
Yeah.
just like, I don't, it just didn't do anything for me. And then once I got to Puppet, the amount that I cared about somebody from marketing talking to me about what they were thinking, or sales, or whoever, like it was worlds different. Like
Sure. Yeah.
because I appreciate it so much more. And so then it was like, okay, now I'm going to figure out a way that it's not, I don't care who you are, I do it this way, screw you. It's, oh, I understand what you're trying to do. I understand what the company's trying to do. How can I help make this happen using my knowledge and expertise to make that even better? And I think, is that kind of sunshiny and rainbows? Yeah, it is. But I
Yeah.
think it's like, but it's real. And so, if you can get people who care, they're gonna do good work. If you have a bunch of people that don't care, um, is there a way you can make them care? Is it by making the job more interesting? Is it rewarding them better? Whatever it is. But I think ultimately, and some people love more governance and love more structure and more, some people love to work in that environment. Other people hate it. And go find the right people for the type of environment you have. Like if you have people that love structure, go work in big enterprise where you have bureaucratic process and you have to fill out a form before you can do something and all that. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't enjoy it. And so, I go to a startup where it's like, we don't have a process for that. I'm like, cool, I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
I'll go make something. I'll go figure out how to make it happen. And we
Yeah.
go make it happen. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also something to say because it also gives you sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Autonomy is not the right word, but I'm gonna use the word autonomy. It gives you the autonomy to make decisions based on your experiences, right? Instead of having to kind of, make sure that you're following all the processes in a way that's, could potentially slow you down, or even not even slow you down per se, but just make it more challenging for you to get the value that you're trying to get. So we're all at the end of the day, we're all trying to like bring value, right? Whether you're writing code, whether you're, patching OSs, whether you're doing this, like it's all about bringing value, right? And that value aggregated up turns into like, okay, is this a successful business or not, right? And I think one of the things that I find very fascinating about technology is, we kind of own how much value that we can generate. Because at the end of the day, like depending on the structure and the flexibility of your IT organization, you can bring lots of value or you can bring almost no value, right? And I think that one of the things that I'd like to hear from you as we're about to wrap up is like, what does the future look like in your opinion? Like, obviously, we don't have crystal balls, so you can't really say, oh, okay, in 6 months it's going to be like this. But like, we're marching toward a particular path, right? We're going to get to the path at some point in the future where 100% of the code that's generated is going to be AI generated. There's going to be automation for almost everything. So where's the role of technology and the individuals that are in technology, other than just the kind of gatekeepers as you were talking about a bit earlier? What other ways can we bring value than just moving bits around in a piece of software or in a system?
I mean, I think it's so much of it now is about, can you deliver the solution you need directly? Like how many of the things have you wanted to work on in the past and you deprioritized it because it just wasn't the top priority.
Yeah.
It wasn't the most important. It wasn't the most painful thing you were doing. And so, you knew you had a suboptimal process operating for 2 years because you just couldn't dedicate time to go fix it. Well, if you can write AI assisted code and you understand the problem, if you can document that problem fairly well, like say make it a page and a half of text, input that as a prompt, build an implementation plan, task plan, and then get software out the other end that basically takes care of that or solves it in a more elegant way. That is awesome. And so
Yeah.
to me, like I think what most engineers, software engineers should be doing is evaluating themselves on specification and validation. Like those are the arts now. Writing code turns out was never the hardest part of software engineering. It was
Sure.
always, do you understand the problem, which is still the hardest part. But can you talk about the problem? Can you specify? Can you communicate about it? Then can you validate the solution? Because a lot of times the solutions that AI picks are completely within the guardrails you provided, but the guardrails
Yep.
you provided were not um, descriptive enough. And
Yep.
and so you have to kind of be able to validate that and come back to it. And so um, the one takeaway I keep telling my engineers is like, you are not measured. Your value is not time in your editor. Your
Yeah.
value is, have you solved problems for users? And like that's where you have to keep kind of regrounding yourself. And maybe you have an opportunity to solve 15 problems out of two. Like that's awesome. And so that's I've been working on a personal project and I was adding like open graph previews to links and things like that. I would have never prioritized that in any way, but
Sure.
it was just like, it's like that's a 2 sentence prompt and it just kind of puts it in there.
Yeah.
Awesome. I was never going to think about that. So it's stuff like that I think it's I don't know. I look at it as like a whole world of new opportunity versus
Yeah.
like a scary thing. I think the things that I would say I spend more time thinking about in this realm is like team size. Do you still want it to be 8, or do you want like 2 and a couple agents? Do you want 1 and a
Yeah.
couple agents? Do you want 3? Like hyper growth. Do you still want to double engineering year over year when you're like on your Series C to D to director, or do you want to just actually increase your compute and your AI plans? Like I don't know the answer to all that stuff yet, but I'm fascinated by it. I know that all the previous experience I have isn't worth as much as it used to be. So, so yeah,
Yeah, I have a friend who always jokes about like when the cloud was introduced, like his 3-page resume turned into a 2-page resume because the cloud was created, right? So I mean,
yeah,
I think we're all going to get to this point in our careers where everything we've learned up to today is no longer valid, and it's what we do from today onward is what like really stands helps us stand out amongst our peers and amongst the industry in general, right? Like I guess the biggest caveat I always tell people is like you have to be paying attention because eventually you'll be so far behind if you're not paying attention that it'll be almost impossible for you to do anything, right? And then you're basically just restarting your career, which I mean is probably not ideal for people that have been doing this for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right?
right. And I think the gap between kind of those that are doing it the way they used to and the cutting edge is only widening, and it's widening at a rate that I don't think has ever been
Yeah,
achieved before. But if you're working in a slow moving environment, it might be fine to not adapt because
sure.
that environment doesn't need you to, but you have to think about what's your long-term career prospects and income prospects and all that. And it might be that this company's really stable and you could stay there for the rest of your career, and if so, more power to you, you're
Yeah,
great. And but if not, what are you going to do when that change needs to happen? And
sure.
I think that's a big, like, that's a person analysis that you have to look at.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, this has been really fascinating talking to you because I think you have a very, and I don't know if this is accurate to you actually, but you seem like you have a very altruistic outlook to things, which I think um, is refreshing for somebody like I'm a bit of a realist or more of a pessimist and naturally. So like when I think of things, I tend to think of like, oh, that's not great. But like hearing somebody who's been doing this for so long and has been able to kind of navigate these different changes in technology and still like find tons of joy out of it is really, really great. So I want to commend you for that. And for folks that you might not be aware of what Michael's doing or what Flox is doing, there'll be some links to the show notes. You can find Michael on Blue Sky, for instance. So at stahnma.us, so stahnma.us. There'll be some links as well below, and there'll be a link to Flox's website also. I highly recommend you check them out, solely because it's trying to solve a developer problem or a technologist problem that we don't think about until it's too late. So I recommend not thinking about it before it's too late and thinking about it right now. So before we sign off, my friend, do you have any parting words?
Um, no, I don't think so. This has been really enjoyable. Yeah, just there's so many places we could have gone on the conversation, so
Yeah.
it's been fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the
But
best part
yeah,
about this show is that I look
I
down
guess
and it's an hour, right?
back to your altruistic part. That's not often how I get called, but I'll take the compliment. I enjoy it. And I will say I've had more fun writing code in the last year than I have probably in the previous 5, and it's
Yeah.
because like I don't burden myself with things like, I don't care how Open Graph works. I just need it in certain things,
Yeah.
things like that. Or like, so sometimes it's great just being able to tell the AI, go add this, and then I don't have to
Yeah.
think about how it works. So
Yeah. As
that's
long as
great.
as
So
long as you look at it and you know what it's doing, right? Back to our
yeah,
conversation earlier. Yeah.
do you have some understanding of it, or do you have a way to validate it? And Yeah, and then obviously things that are going into production are touching money. You want to have different levels of
Sure,
rigor on
sure.
versus versus the stupid website I play with my friends. So so yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think it that's a good way to look at it too. It's like, what is the level of risk that you're willing to inherit by doing something, right? If it's a side project, cool. Like you said, if it's something that involves money, probably not so much. So,
Right, right. Yeah, you have
yeah.
to have the right risk profile. So
Yeah.
yep.
Uh,
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much.
yeah, of
So
course. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the folks that are watching this live and the folks that are listening in the future. So, my name is Isaac Levin, and this has been Coffee and Open Source. Be sure to share this with your friends or like, subscribe wherever you're finding it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. From my friend Michael. Take care.
thank you. Bye.